It's got a kitchen connection.
You got the CAO.
The CAO.
Okay, I'll get this general committee started then. Mr. Clerk, it is 7:01 p.m., April 21st, 2015. Mr. Mayor? Are you ready now? Wonderful.
We'll have to separate those two.
Yeah, I guess we might. So we'll start with declarations of pecuniary interest. I'll ask my colleagues to declare. Seeing none, Mr. Clerk, I'll ask for an approval of the agenda as amended. And I'd like moved by Councillor Abel, seconded by Councillor Humphreys. Comments or questions? All right, all in favor? Opposed? That carries, Mr. Clerk. So we'll move to determination of items requiring separate discussion. I will start on my right with Councillor Maracas.
Nothing for me, Mr. Chair.
Councillor Gardner?
Nothing for me at the moment.
Councillor Abel? Nothing at this time, Mr. Chair. Councillor Humphreys? Mr. Mayor? Councillor Kim? Nothing. Councillor Key?
Oh, sorry.
We're 8 for 8 right now. Okay, Councillor Gardner, would you like to pull something?
7 and 8, please.
7 and 8. And that's it? Okay, just to confirm, it's 7 and 8. So I guess we'll move then to adoption of items not requiring separate discussion. Can I have someone move that, please? Oh, we have Councillor Kim. Sorry.
I would like to pull items 12, 14, and the 8, please.
8's been pulled.
Oh, okay, sorry.
So just to recap, we have items 7, 8, 12, and 14. So now we'll move on to adoption of items not requiring separate discussion. Can I have some? Councillor Abel moved that, a seconder. Councillor Gardner, all in favor? Opposed? Carries, Mr. Clerk.
So the delegates here for an item that's been carried on consent.
So we're moving to delegations, but the item that's the delegate, so you're okay? Okay, then I guess we'll move on to presentations by the advisory committee chair. Does any of the chairs of the advisory committees wish to make a presentation to council? Councilor Maracas?
I think Mr. Chair, just say I wasn't there. I know I'm the chair of the Environmental Advisory Committee, but I wasn't there. And if the vice chair would like to say anything to it, then by all means.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, I wanted to reiterate how appreciative I am that staff are undergoing an onboarding process for all of our committee members. From what I've seen so far, it's been it's good to have it this time around. So again, I wanted to express my appreciation. We saw it I saw it at both the EAC and the EDAC meetings. It's great just to have some opportunity for members of the committees to get acclimatized at the committees and what they're doing. So just wanted to say thank you for that.
Thank you, Councilor Peter. Anyone else? Okay, I guess we'll move on then. So we're going to consider the items that were pulled, and we'll begin with item 7, which was pulled by Councillor Gardner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll move as is.
Seconded by Councillor Marakis. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Simonovskis, perhaps Mr. Downey. I'm not sure why this wasn't identified as something that we might want to do when we did the whole family leisure complex reconstruction. Is there anything you have to add to that?
Certainly through Mr. Chair. I can just speak from the perspective of the project, the Leisure Family Services, or the Leisure Facility Services project with regards to the space for youth was focused on that project. So there were no components that include the ICE side of the facility. So this work is coming out of investigations that we initiated as part of the discovery of some of the moisture conditions that we found in the ICE side, and it's really falling out of that initial work.
Mr. Downey, do you have anything to add to that?
To you, Mr. Chair, no, I thought he said it well. The focus of our attention with the leisure complex was the creation of a youth center, not the renovation of the leisure complex. So this would fall under that renovation component, and so we did not consider it.
Councillor Gardner?
Through you again to Mr. Simonovskis first. You spoke of the moisture problems that we had in the arena, and that was we had mold issues. Is that what you mean by the moisture issue?
Mr. Simonovskis?
Certainly through Mr. Chair, yes, there was a report that was brought forward to council in the fall when we identified accumulation of mold in the seating area, which actually has now been removed. So that was part of that report that was brought earlier to council when we identified those issues.
Thank you. And if you speak to some of the users of that particular facility, they will tell you that they knew the mold was there all along, and that staff, at least some members of staff, knew that the mold was there. So I'm disappointed that this actually didn't get picked up in the original project. The 30,000 has gone to 45,000. Could you speak to that, please, just for the initial consult?
Mr. Simonovskis?
Certainly through Mr. Chair, when the initial budget was brought forward, there was a scope of work estimated based on what staff felt would be necessary. When we were doing some of the investigations in the fall of last year, after the budget values were set, the consultant that we had hired to do some of the initial investigations provided some additional input as to what we should be looking for with regards to the ICE and the ICE plant system. So that's where the additional consulting fees have been requested. Some additional work that we didn't foresee as part of the initial capital sheet.
Councillor?
Thank you. And of course, this is an important component of the entire facility, especially now that it has Judy Sharon's name on it. We need to make sure that it is well kept up. But once this is remediated, is there an estimate of how long this would stay in good condition until we have to do this again?
Mr. Simonovskis?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I can't answer that question at this point in time. Part of the investigation is to actually determine the condition of the existing facility, and if there is work required, and then we would bring back a report based on those inspections. Also part of this work is to look at what alternate uses we could consider for that ice pad. As Mr. Downey and his staff proceed with their sports plan, there may be an opportunity to look at alternate uses based on the total suite of facilities that we have within the town, and if there's other demands that might require, say, having no ice in the summer, we could use that pad for some other function. So there's a number of factors at play, in which case we would have to report back on having some more information on all those aspects.
Thank you, and we'll definitely want to consult with the users, which would be the skating group, before we make any decisions on that this time.
Thank you, Councillor Gardner. I have Councillor Marakis next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Mr. Simonovskis, Do we know the actual cause of, like, what caused this? Or is that what this is going to find out for us?
Mr. Simonauskas?
Through Mr. Chair, there's actually no damage per se. The ice has been in that facility for a number of years. So really, this is a preventative maintenance or a preventative inspection exercise to avoid, say, a catastrophic failure of the chilling system if there is something happening underneath that we're not aware of. So really, this is an inspection, investigation exercise to take the ice out, see what's happening, and do some maintenance at the same time. If everything is fine, then the facility carries on. If there's any problems, we'll have a chance to identify them and hopefully rectify them before there's a catastrophic failure of any of the systems.
And thank you. Just to follow up through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Simonauskas. Councillor Gardner mentioned about the mold issue, and I was just curious, maybe it doesn't really state it in here, is there any type of things that we do to look into the prevention at some of our other facilities, like the other ice rinks, to make sure that we don't have any mold issues at those rinks?
Mr. Simonauskas?
Through Mr. Chair, there's a number of initiatives underway right now with regards to all the facilities as part of our regular maintenance program. The issue with this particular facility is the capacity of the dehumidifiers. That's a primary aspect, as well as some opportunities for improving the envelope of the building through our initial inspections that we conducted in the fall. We are conducting an overall facility condition assessment for all of our facilities, which is happening this year, and if there are any opportunities for improvement, they should come out through that study. However, as far as concerns with mold and the other ice rinks, I'm not aware of any concerns. This particular issue came to our attention during the construction and inspection of the, when we were tying the old to the new. I'm not aware of any other concerns within the other facilities there. But if there are, we'll definitely find them and provide direction as to how we can rectify them.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Maracas. Councillor Abel?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And through you, when did we first become aware of mold in the leisure complex?
Mr. Simonauskas?
Certainly, through Mr. Chair, there were actually two incidents, one during the demolition of the construction where there was some mold identified in some ductwork. That was identified early in the project, and that was rectified through the project, through the construction of the addition. Really what it was a high moisture situation within the viewing area. The ice pad was identified in late summer, early fall, when we were doing an inspection with the fire department. So it was at that time where staff were able to actually say, well, something's going on here, we should look into it further. So it was at that point that we brought a report forward to council.
I'm getting a reaction from Councillor Gardner, but you did comment, Councillor Gardner, that staff and users of the facility were aware of mold before that time period. Could you comment on that?
My understanding is that users of the facility were well aware of it, and staff were aware of...
Excuse me, Councillor.
Yes.
Councillor, we'll continue.
Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry, I thought you were finished.
I was mid-sentence.
I was actually confused there as well.
I just asked a question.
I thought you'd asked her a question as well, so my apologies.
Sure, and through Mr. Chair, perhaps I could ask Councillor Gardner if she knew something about before, because it would have been prudent to bring that up at the time, rather than not disclose it. So.
Thank you, Councillor Abel. I found out about this when everybody else found out about this, but in speaking with users and staff, found out that there was no surprise here.
Well, I'm not exactly sure how to deal with that comment. As far as I'm concerned, it was discovered when we were doing the renovations. I did propose when we were going through the whole budgeting for the youth center to expand the scope of the project and to include renovations to other areas, but at that time, council did not make that, did not go along with that decision. So I can appreciate the position that staff were put in. They were directed by council to do one thing, and had we gone ahead and had a little more support, we could have done a little bit more at the time.
Thank you, Councillor Abel. Move along to Mayor Dahl.
Thank you,
you, Mr. Chair. And similar to Councillor Abel, I don't think it's appropriate to say people knew about this and did nothing. If someone knows that there's an issue with a facility, they should put that in writing, and they should get it to either the appropriate director or a member of council. If that's not happening, it's not appropriate to sit here and say people knew about it. It's easy to throw out the accusations, and I think it unfairly targets staff for things that that we can't prove did or didn't happen, so I don't think it's appropriate. And I also recall that with respect to any work on this facility, council was pretty specific that it wasn't to include anything in the ice rinks. So, again, staff is now going through, and this came up a while ago, and I will support going ahead with this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Kim?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Simonovskis. So after the maintenance is completed, will the rink floor be completely level, or is that not part of the cost?
Mr. Simonovskis?
Through Mr. Chair, that's not part of this particular phase of work. This is really just to inspect what's happening, to check the board conditions as well, look for permafrost, because the ice has been, because as the ice stays in the facility for multiple years, you have penetration of the ice into the substrate, so there's those kind of concerns, and then from there bring forward recommendations on what any repairs that might be needed. The issue with regards to any concrete work could be discussed if there's desire through Mr. Downey's studies to, say, use that ice pad for non-ice functions, in which case you'd want to have a smoother concrete surface. If the purpose is not to have non-ice activities in it, then it may be fine the way it is. So.
Councillor Kim?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. So when during the Aurora Home Show, when both rinks were melted, and given that it takes away usage from residents and other revenue-drawing activities, did we use that opportunity to do a maintenance check at that time, or was it already done just previously? Or?
Mr. Simonovskis?
Yeah. Okay. Through you, Mr. Tag team. I don't know what the maintenance schedule is for the facility. I do know that, however, whenever staff have an opportunity to do any inspections or any maintenance, they do take that advantage. Maybe Mr. Downey has a little more information with regards to the timing of the shutdown and the setup.
Mr. Downey?
Through Mr. Chair, with regards to the SARC, the SARC has lines within the floor that prevent permafrost, so we can actually leave those ice pads in for an extended period of time without having any impact on permafrost. That was part of the design feature with regards to the SARC. Part of that was because we wanted a heat recovery system within the facility, and we knew that when we did that, we needed 47 weeks of ice in order to make that effective, and so we knew that we were going to leave that in for a long period of time. We have permafrost lines within that. With regards to taking that out, it gave us an opportunity to certainly inspect the boards, and that is what the facility staff did with regards to the Stronach Aurora Recreation Complex. But we were also able to keep ice then into the Aurora Community Center, where we normally would have ice out, and all the permanent users were then accommodated at the Aurora Community Center. So there was very little lost revenue with regards to, or opportunity with regards to taking the ice out of the SARC.
You're finished, Councillor Kim? Councillor Gardner, did I have you wishing to speak for a second time?
No, I'm fine, thanks.
You're fine. Councillor Humphreys, would you like to say something?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick question. I'm just reading over. I know this may have been answered already, but just to clarify, it looks like through a second look at this, the initial budget request was 30, we moved to 45, and there was an increase based on our desired inspections and testing, the scope of work we want to achieve. Just wondering, why we didn't have that kind of perspective to start with. Why do we think 30,000 was good to begin with? Then we, kind of took another kick around. Really, we want to get this bigger, look at the arena in the state that it's in. Any further explanation on that?
Councillor Humphreys, I think that was asked prior, but perhaps Mr. Szymanowski.
I just understand. It was, but not. I need to understand exactly why we wouldn't have thought of this through at the beginning and had 45,000 assigned.
Mr. Sinofsky, could you comment on that?
Certainly, through Mr. Mayor, I believe, and I have to go back to the capital sheet, but I believe the electrical system inspection was added. It was recommended because of the high humidity. There was some recommendation to do some additional inspections in that area, which really isn't part of the ice surface, but it's part of the supporting systems.
Thank you so much. That's what I need to, because it's a significant change. I don't think it was just like, we want more inspection done. There's a component that, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Humphreys. Welcome, Councillor Thompson. If there's no further comments on that item, I'll call a vote. All those in favor of item 7? Opposed? Carries, Mr. Clerk. We'll move on to item 8, and that was also pulled by Councillor Gardner.
Move as is.
Seconded by Councillor Maracus. Councillor Gardner, you have the floor.
Thank you, and I understand that when we looked at expanding the leisure complex for a fitness center and to add a youth space, I understand that we had a certain mandate. But all of that was based on a staff report. And I don't understand why things that could have been considered at that time, could have been brought to council's attention, were not brought to council's attention, and now we are here after spending a lot of money, and we're going to have to explain to the public why we're spending more money. So through you, and maybe this really goes to Mr. Downey, because Mr. Simonovskis has only held this portfolio for a few years. It was under the Leisure Services Department. When we have, through you, Mr. Chair, when we have a facility like a pool and a dehumidification unit, and we know that it has a certain lifespan, and it is getting towards the end of that lifespan, and potentially shutting it down could cause problems. I mean, why isn't that in council's frame of reference? Why wasn't that in council's frame of reference, please?
Mr. Downey, can you answer that?
To you, Mr. Chair, I think it's going to be a bit of a technical effort again. With regards to the portfolio, it's actually been with IES for 7 years. So the transition was made in 2008. When we came forward with the leisure complex, we came forward with that from a design perspective and not a facility operational perspective. That is the mandate of the IES department. Certainly there were some issues related to that facility that we were going to come forward. However, this facility is not unlike any other facility that we might have within the municipality, whether it be the community center, Church Street School, the library, whatever it happens to be. There is ongoing maintenance requirements regarding every facility, and those are not necessarily tied into or coordinated with any construction projects that we have ongoing from a design perspective. So the pool as well as the rink were not part of the overall program with regards to the provision of youth space within the facility, so that no attention was paid to them with regards to any requirements for rehabilitation or replacement of any existing equipment.
Mr. Simonovskis, do you have anything to add to that?
Just to maybe help with regards to why we are now replacing this piece of equipment. The equipment was shut down when the pool was taken offline as part of the running track installation. The pool had to be drained. So during startup, it was determined that there were components within that system that, because of age and because of a shutdown period, we're going to cost us about $70,000 to basically replace, to refire that equipment. And then when you look at the actual efficiency of that dehumidifier that we have and that investment, it's really a lost investment. So hence the report where staff are looking at, do we invest $70,000 into a piece of equipment that's only going to last maybe 3, 4, or 5 years at a high energy consumption rate versus going with a new piece of equipment that's going to be more efficient and that'll give us a full life for that piece of equipment. So Mr. Downey's comments are I totally agree with what he's saying. We look at the entire portfolio. Part of what we're trying to work towards, and I mentioned earlier, is a condition assessment of all the facilities. Condition assessments were done for the major components in 2009 as part of PSAB and asset management the initial projects. However, because we're looking at everything at the first time, everything was done sort of a cursory review. Now we're going to go back and go through all the facilities, and they are getting at that age. I mean, these facilities are 20 plus years old. You're going to look at major component failures. We have changed out some fairly significant components in the last 5 to 7 years already with heating units and rooftop units, so it's to be expected. It'd be nice to have a crystal ball to know when they're going to fail, but we try to do as best we can.
Councillor Gardner?
That's all for now.
Thank you. I have Councillor Abel, Councillor Humphreys, and Councillor Maracas. Councillor Abel?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I notice that the funding for this is coming out of our repair and replacement. So through Mr. Chair, it falls within what the director said in that these items get to an age of 25, 30 years, and we know that we're going to have to look at them and repair and replace, much like any infrastructure. This is specifically at the leisure complex, so it's not a budget per se, but it is coming out of the reserve. I think that's more of a comment than a question. I do recall, through you, Mr. Chair, that I think when we were looking at the leisure complex on the Youth Needs Center and it was introduced to expand the scope, one of the items was the HVAC system. Is that correct, through you, Mr. Chair? I think it was something like $380,000 or something along those lines.
Mr. Downey?
To you, Mr. Chair, I don't recall whether or not a presentation was made to council, so I'd have to go back and take a look at the reports with regards to that. I know that there was discussion with regards to upgrading of the HVAC system, particularly with regards to innovation, not with regards to the pool and not with regards to the rink, but with a look at this is what we have and can we do it better from an operational perspective, because we're trying to keep our operational costs down. The concern at that point was, and I remember the discussion with the architect, was that there was a cost implication associated with that, and that was going to have an impact on the budget. And as you can appreciate, my recommendation to the architect was that we were not going to bring forward anything that was going to have a negative impact on the budget. We had clear direction from council that there were some concerns with regards to the budget, and that we were going to do our very best to provide and complete this project within that budget allocation.
Councillor Abel?
And so, thank you, Mr. Downey. And so my comment is that Councillor Gardner's brought up was why wouldn't we made aware of these situations at the time? We would have been avoiding these repairs right now, which I totally agree with. But I do recall that I was in favor of expanding the scope, and I do recall this item. It made perfect sense to me that if you're going to expand your facility, might as well at the same time put some good investment in the HVAC system, because if you leave the old one in there at its age and the workload it's going to endure, it would be prudent to circumvent that and put in a brand new system at the same time, especially since the funding, as we know, was coming from a DC, and that was an opportunity to invest in infrastructure, which it always is with DC money when you plan ahead. So I can appreciate that we will be discovering certain items as we go along. I mean, we have discovered that there's a mold issue, which means to me that the humidity is going to be a factor of this. So it seems to me that if we're addressing the dehumidification, that makes sense to me, because that's probably going to assist in abating the mold situation. So I'm in favor of moving ahead with this.
Thank you, Councillor Abel. I have Councillor Humphreys next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm supportive of doing this work. It needs to be done for sure. Question I have is the HVAC work that we're doing in this area of the building, will it positively impact the older part of the building, will it positively impact the new addition, which is having severe issues with HVAC there? Are we going to be investing this money and then come back a little later and say we need to do additional work on the new part of the building? So I'd like to understand that with you, Mr. Chair.
Perhaps I could throw that to Mr. Simonovskis for a comment?
Through you, Mr. Chair, this is basically a dehumidifier for the pool area. There's also an HVAC system for the pool area as well. So this is intended to take out the moisture, whereas the HVAC system is intended to keep the temperature moderate within a pool area. So it doesn't affect anything outside the pool area. Any modifications that we may require for any other parts of the system within the building would have to be addressed as separate items. And it's a standalone unit. It's basically one unit that goes on the roof that just serves that area.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just so I'm clear, regardless, this is a standalone unit. Even if we were looking at the HVAC for the entire building, the pool area is separate on its own. Okay, I'm hearing some comments around the table about expanding the scope and, more budget and so on. I'm concerned when I hear those comments because if HVAC in general was a serious issue and would implicate the success of that new leisure complex, I would have liked to see it in front of us and make that decision. I know we put a lot of burden on staff to hold down the budget and don't come back. We don't want to hear another increase, but to Councillor Abel's point, it was budgeted in DCs. It is what it is, and I'm concerned that if there's something else that we are going to be surprised with or need to be aware of, that I'd like to see it sooner than later and get all the items of issues and concern at that complex on the table and corrected. So just a comment.
Thank you, Councillor Humphreys. I'll move to Councillor Marakis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Kind of the same comments on the lines with Councillor Humphreys. I'd like to see at this point, we've had so many different small issues pop up over the last couple of months when it comes to the leisure complex. I'm just hoping that we can kind of get, whatever's there, let's just get it out, let's figure it out now, put it in front of us, let's approve it, let's get this done, and let's get ahead of it. Just have two questions through you to Mr. Simonovskis. I'm just curious, do you know the average lifespan of one of these dehumidification units?
Mr. Simonovskis?
Through Mr. Chair, typically for mechanical equipment, you're looking at minimum 20 years. 25 years may be typical, and if you can get up to 30 years with robust equipment and a solid maintenance program, that's the range. Okay. There are also periods where we have early failures because either it's undersized or oversized.
Of course. Thank you. And just as a follow-up through you, it was slightly answered. I was going to ask if this was a standalone unit and it just dealt with just the pool, which was answered. But I was just wondering, do we have a dehumidification unit for the rink area? Is there a separate one for that area?
Mr. Simonovskis?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, there is a separate, there's actually there's two units within the rink area, and that's one of the things that we need to also upgrade. As part of a report back to council that we have committed to with regards to the ice area, we'll be looking at both dehumidification and building envelope, and there'll be recommendations that will come forward, again, based on the use. If we don't need ice in the summer, then those demands will be lower. If we do want ice in the summer, then those demands will have to be met with better dehumidification.
Councilor? I guess that just kind of goes to back my beginning comments that, if that's the case, I would have preferred to see that lumped in altogether, I'd hate to see it come back. Here if we approve 210 for one dehumidification unit and then, a month later we're going to come back and we're going to be looking at another dehumidification unit for another 200 or 300,000. I would have preferred to possibly look at doing it all together. Maybe you would get some savings by getting 2 or 3 units all at once instead of just doing 1 unit at a time. So, if that's the case and we are looking into that, I would actually prefer to postpone this until we look at those other dehumidification units and possibly looking to do them all at one time. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I will move to Mayor Dobb.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Some good comments around the table. My question to Mr. Simonovskis probably, so we've talked about in maintenance and long-term tracking of things, and we didn't have a good handle on this, on the maintenance and the lifespan of this dehumidification unit. So we're using this opportunity to inform ourselves through Maximo, putting that in there, developing maintenance schedules for those pieces of equipment, and not just this one, but as we are going forward, are we using that as an opportunity to change how we're doing our business? Mr. Simonovskis?
Yes, definitely through you, Mr. Chair. Much of the assets are within Maximo at this point in time, but they're the major components. So part of the condition assessment for the remainder of the buildings, or for the remainder of the components of the buildings, is really to get down to the next level of detail. It's sort of the next iteration of our program. The challenge, of course, is keeping up with the equipment. And unfortunately, in the case of the AFLC, much of the equipment, I know we changed the rooftop units 3 years ago because they had reached the end of their life. So much of the equipment at that facility has either reached the end of its life or is approaching it. So these are not necessarily unforeseen, but they weren't fully daylighted to have an awareness of this. I mean, it would have been definitely, in hindsight, it would have been definitely good to have this information as part of Mr. Downey's design efforts to bring forward some information on what the equipment status was and consideration at that time. So that would have definitely been a beneficial exercise if we had the details.
Just a supplementary, Mr. Chair, I just want to make sure, and maybe through you to Mr. Garvey, just as a note, that we need to be taking these opportunities to make sure we're moving to preventive maintenance, because we can save a ton of dough doing that, just getting out ahead of those things. So that's my comment, Mr. Chair. Mr. CEO, do you have a comment on that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it is the reason why we're doing the condition assessment, so we can get ahead of them on the maintenance schedule. So, and it has as you say, a lasting impact in terms of the life of life and the ultimate value of those assets. So that is underway.
Okay, thank you, Mayor Dahl. I have Councillor Kim next. Councillor?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through Mr. Chair to Mr. Simonovskis, it seems like in the interim we'll be using the HVAC system to dehumidify the pool area, and it says here consumption of energy can be up to 70,000 per year. So given that we have about 7 months to go for the balance of the year, will that 70,000 or 35 or 40,000 of that, will that be taken out of our operational, or would that be taken from the facilities repair and replacement reserve?
Mr. Simonovskis?
Those are coming out of the operational budget based on hydro, where our hydro is paid from. The reserves are not to be used for operation costs. They're just to be used for asset replacement or the actual physical components of the building. So okay. It's right out of the operating cost.
Okay. So through Mr. Chair, to either Mr. Elliott or to Mr. Simonovskis, so then if it's on the operating budget, then that means you have to take into consideration the 35,000 into this year's budget then?
Mr. Simonovskis?
So the reason why we brought this report forward was we looked at the sort of the cost benefit of waiting, and as was mentioned by Councillor Marakis, looking at an omnibus report to say here's where all of our repairs are, but because we're moving into the summer season when the humidity will be higher in that pool area, that's the period that we want to actually have this system operating. So hence the report to actually move this piece forward to try and minimize those impacts. We are operating the existing system as minimally as we can to minimize our costs, and if we can get this piece of equipment ordered, it can be put into place, I think, by mid-June, ordered in place by mid-June. So that's our goal, to have in for the summer when we expect most of the costs to be incurred.
Okay.
Councillor?
Yeah. And one more comment and perhaps a question from this is that I think many of the concerns that's been raised so far at the table should be resolved when we move into, when we go from a cash-based budgeting to a long-term accrual-based budgeting, and I believe we're going by a 5-year accrual methodology, and I think in going to a long-term methodology, we're going to have a good inventory of tangible capital assets are and amortize that over the 5 years or 20 years or what it might be. So I think these types of events will be avoided by moving into that, hopefully, next year, whenever that might be. So my question through the chair to Mr. Elliott would be, we need to have a thorough inventory of our capital tangible assets and the amortization and the maintenance and so forth. When do you expect that we'll start that for our new budgeting process?
Mr. Elliott?
Through you, Mr. Chair, actually, it's not related to a new budget requirement. It was a requirement of, I believe it was 2010, for us to have our tangible capital assets listed as capital assets on our financial statements. And so that whole exercise required an extensive review of our assets and document the inventories. And this is where Director Simonowskis referred to the first pass may not have been perfect, but as we get further into things, we are finding a few little situations that were not discovered or were not apparent at the time. The initial work was to simply identify the assets, when were they built, when were they acquired, how much were they worth, and it was an accounting exercise. It was much more an accounting exercise than it was an asset management exercise. But we do have detailed asset inventories now, and we continue to work and refine on those through the WAM system and through our annual reporting.
Councillor?
Yeah, I think that's it. I think, as we continue to fine-tune our inventory of our capital assets, I'm pretty certain that as we move along to our new budgeting process, these types of uneventful issues will pop up fewer and fewer in between. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kim. I have Councillor Thompson next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through to Mr. Simonowskis. Mr. Simonowskis, we were responding to Mayor Dawes' question. You and correct me if I'm wrong, indicated that most of the mechanical items are approaching end of life at the leisure complex, and so some of this is not unforeseen. Is that correct?
Mr. Simonowskis?
Through Mr. Chair, that is correct.
So I guess my concern then is when I look at our 10-year capital forecast, which really is a guide for us to be able to repair and replace those assets and those items, we have very few things listed for mechanical sense for the leisure complex. We have the HVAC system at $135,000, we have the ductwork at $75,000, but no other items are allocated over the next 10 years. So if everything's approaching its end of life and it's not unforeseen, how come we haven't identified them on our 10-year capital?
Mr. Simonowskis?
So through Mr. Chair, so with regards to the AFLC, the rooftop units were replaced, I believe, 3 years ago now. That was a major investment that we made on that facility. This particular dehumidification unit is a small component, so for whatever reason it wasn't included in that retrofit. With regards to the other facilities, for example, this facility, we replaced the rooftop units in this facility, I believe, 2 years ago, or about 2 years ago, same time frame. So the major components have been captured, but there are still, and this is why we're doing the more detailed condition assessment, because there are still smaller components or smaller elements of a building that need to be factored in when the replacement is a big area that could become an issue. During the first review, we recognized that the building may be 25, 30 years old, but we haven't really looked at the condition of the windows as an example. So there are elements that I know exist that we need to look at more closely, and it's not to say that they're going to require replacement, but at least to have a condition done so we can at least put a life on them. When Mr. Elliott mentioned the PSAB inventory work, that work was done based on typical life cycles for various components. So you might say mechanical systems, 30 years, that's the target. Electrical systems, 30 years. Roof systems, 15 years. So things were given target renewal dates, and then now we need to go back and actually look at the condition specifically and make sure we've captured it. So I would predict that our requests are going to go up. It's just a matter of where we are with regards to the overall inventory.
Councillor Thompson?
Thank you, Mr. Simonowskis. Although it doesn't seem to correlate to your earlier comment that we're approaching the end of life for all the mechanical And so to me, I think that's still something that needs to be addressed in the 10-year capital, so we have an idea of being able to put that money away, because we're drawing from the repair and replacement. If we don't identify those costs, then Mr. Elliott's not able to balance that reserve or put us in a position that we're looking to go for. And so whether it's a whole bunch of little items or some bigger items, that if we have mechanical and other items that are approaching end of life, as you just indicated earlier, I think we need to have a placeholder in those 10-year capital plans so that we can budget accordingly to make sure that we can replace them as necessary, because if we don't plan for it, that's when we get into trouble. So I'm not sure if your answer really spoke to the question, which was, if we're approaching end of life, we need to put them on to 10-year. But I did hear Mr. Garby say that we're going to go through a more detailed analysis with our facilities, and I think it's imperative that, those items, or at least a placeholder, gets placed on that 10-year capital, so that, our fiscal strategy of being able to have a healthy reserve account is accurate.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. We have Councillor Humphreys for a second time. Wendy, would you like to speak for a second time? Oh, sorry, Councillor Gardner, I should say. Councillor Humphreys.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much. Just a quick question, and again, apologies if it was answered. I'm just trying to follow the different lines of discussion. But our asset management system, have we completed putting that into our database? Are we there yet with her?
Mr. Szymanowski, would you like to comment on that?
Certainly, through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, our asset management system is populated. Basically the process was to meet PSAT requirements. All the assets were documented in spreadsheets, and then when we moved to implementation of Maximo, all that information was then imported into Maximo. Staff, basically, since that point in time, we've been going through the various asset classes, updating information, updating records. There's a lot of, if you can appreciate, there's a lot of lines within the town. So basically, we have staff that are continuously going through various classes and doing updates, proofing out replacement cycles and proofing out budget numbers to try and continually refine that data. So it's not a once, it's basically an ongoing operational activity.
Perfect. Thank you. So thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So we've got our system there, we've got our database, we've got a good sort of base to start with. It's absolutely a living process. Do we have something like a life cycle management prime that different areas would actually look to some of the things we talked about, as the database is there, we have to look at maybe targeting life cycle against any components, whether it's windows or HVAC, and have a target there so that we can build out to the 10-year capital plan reserves. Are we there yet, or are we still when you're saying updating, are we just updating and trying to get a grasp of it, or do we really have a strong focus on that? Because I think, life cycle management is critical to building our reserves and knowing what's coming, and then there's always the things you don't expect. But wondering where we're at with that, if we have that type of a focus right now.
Mr. Szymanowski, would you like to comment on that?
So yes, through Mr. Chair, we most definitely do. Since I've been here, asset management has been a priority. In this particular case, we need to also consider that this piece of equipment was shut down for 8 months. That's the main reason for its failure. If that facility kept running through, we may have gotten another 4 or 5 years out of this piece of equipment. So it's not that it failed and then it's a surprise. And the reality is, we also had challenges with the boiler for the pool. It's a 20-year-old boiler. There was some reconditioning costs that we had to incur to get that boiler running because it was shut down for 6 months. So it's not that we've missed anything. The fact is that we had a shutdown, but on the asset management side, I think what's important to recognize, it's a living document. Mr. Elliott just brought forward the asset management plan that was put together for the end of 2014, which is a critical document with regards to life cycle targets, the asset classes that we manage, and our strategy towards actually renewing those assets. That's a pinnacle document for us as a guidance for council to understand where we're going with asset management, as well as guiding our strategy. And with regards to, again, just speaking to the maintenance and ongoing work that we do, maintenance has been happening in all the facilities. We're now trying to incorporate the tracking and prediction of maintenance through the asset management plan. So this is an ongoing learning process. You're working asset class by asset class. You're training people to use the system. You're training people to understand how the system can be used as a prediction tool. So it's not, this will be going on for the next 10 years. And every year we get better and better at it.
Thank you. And just one last, I appreciate that. Thank you. And it sounds like, we're getting there, and we've got a handle on it. We can predict quite a bit, it sounds, from the sounds of it. And just in terms of, from a director level and CEO level, do you have reports that get sent out, and here's the view for this year, next year, like at a high level per building, per road, anything like that you're reviewing, just from a reporting perspective? So I'm getting into the weeds, but...
Yeah, no problem. Through Mr. Chair, so what we do is the tenure, we have a 50-year forecast. The 50-year forecast was done and issued to identify the big anomalies. So right now what we're focusing on is the annual 10-year updates, because the 10-year horizon, now we've identified some of the bigger blips within our longer-term horizon. We know where they're at. But the 10-year is really where we inform council as to our reserve requirements, as well as understand how our program is going. Every year for all the asset classes, that 10-year program is reviewed, looking, as an example, looking at 2016, the condition assessments for those projects identified in 16 are done in 15 to verify whether they're still needed, and if not, we push them out, because those target dates were set again based on some standard timelines. So it's definitely reviewed every year. I mean, the reality of the program is we have limited resources, and we want to spend every dollar as best we can, and if we don't have to spend it this year, we try not to. So
thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I have Councillor Gardner for a second time. Councillor Gardner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through to Mr. Elliott. Mr. Elliott, part of the work that was done at the complex was done through development charges, because we could say that it was needed through growth. When you have a pool that has certain mechanical units, I mean, we could also say that it is, perhaps we could also say that it is being more used because of growth. But there is no way that we can take any of this money for this equipment out of DCs.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's correct. The pool may have been used by new members of the community, but it's an operating cost to replace an existing asset, and it's not a development charge eligible item.
So as a follow-up, thank you, Mr. Chair. So generally, mechanical items that we've been discussing a lot in the last few minutes, those are items that can only be replaced with the repair and replacement budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gardner. Councillor Earle for a second time.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And through you, if you're expanding a facility like we were and we wanted to upgrade our HVAC, could we have put that in as part of our DC development at that time?
Mr. Elliott? Certainly, if we focus on the pool, if you were doubling the size of the pool, you would need to double the size of the HVAC unit. And if that required changing out this one and putting in one new one, you could probably argue that it would all be DC eligible. In this case, the pool didn't change. The capacity of the unit doesn't change. It's just simply worn out.
But specifically on the pool is what we're talking about here. But what I'm talking about is when we expanded the whole facility. We added on rooms, we grew. At that time, we could have asked for an increase on load on our HVAC and then upgraded it at that time. Would that have been DC eligible? Had we thought of it at that time or approved it at that time?
Through Mr. Chair, if I'm not mistaken, the architectural designs, the mechanical designs included an expansion of the existing facilities for HVAC. The existing capacities of HVAC were being expanded, if I recall correctly. And so those expansions would have been paid by DCs, yes.
Did we go ahead with that, Mr. Elliott?
I'm not sure. I'm not close to the project.
I think
Another question, Councillor Abel?
I directed, Mr. Chair, I directed that Mr. Elliott, but through you, if you could find a response to that question, I'd appreciate it.
And the question you're asking is whether or not this was looked at as part of the... What we're talking about now, though, is the replacement of this, and you're looking at whether or not we approved funding for it when the original tender went out for the leisure complex. Is that correct?
That's correct. It was in response to the question that Councillor Gardner had asked. And the response at that time was mechanical can only be replaced by operation. And I thought, but if you're expanding a facility, you could ask for that to be included, and part of the expansion program would include upgraded HVAC system. So my question was, did we do that?
Well, Councillor Abel, in getting context to this, I think I'll try to get an answer for you, and I'll go to Mr. CAO.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think I'll take this question so that the purists of finance can stay here. What we were able to do with this project is renew a lot of the mechanical systems. And so some of the mechanical, the HVAC system were attributable to the expansion. However, while we're up there, we need to replace the whole unit because that's just the way we do it. So we actually tried as much as possible to leverage as much renewal as we could into that project. This unit is discrete and for the pool. So there's no way to argue that this could be part of the DC funding, but we did that. We took that direction, and if you recall some of the tours that we took through, we talked about some of the remediation that we were able to do under the envelope, and we tried to push that envelope as much as possible so that the tax levy dollars weren't spent on the facility. And that was the objective of council, is not to spend tax levy dollars on that project. So now it's almost like a phased project. So now we have the expansion project, which is nearing completion, and now the second phase of the renewal of the facility is the arena, is the pool, and so that's where we're at. And Mr. Sinoskis is undertaking that condition assessment so we can get a handle on things that are going to be funded from tax levy sources. So in the answer to your question is we took that opportunity under the direction of council to maximize our funding, non-tax funding envelope as much as we could.
And thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. That's great. So we can say that the areas that we weren't, that assessment is ongoing at present and being brought up. Thank you very much.
Are there any further comments? Councillor Thompson for a second time.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, Mr. Kirby. Just to be clear, so you're saying on those parts of the facility that were expanded, we expanded the capacity of the HVAC system. We either maximized it, added on, or so we increased it for those the newer parts of the facility or the overall building.
That's correct. That's correct.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Simonoskis. Mr. Simonoskis, earlier this year we approved a capital budget project for an HVAC or dehumidification unit for the arena. Is there any opportunity to link the two or piggyback them on for some savings?
Mr. Simonoskis?
For you, with regards to the capital project itself, so the capital sheet for that project was improvements on the ice side, on the cold side. I may not have made it clear, I mentioned earlier, we looked at actually trying to link the two projects together, but that phase, or the cold side, isn't far enough along to know what we actually need to do, and we as staff made the assessment that it's prudent to actually move ahead with this one because of the cost avoidance essentially is what we're looking at. So if council would like us to link the projects, we can, I guess the only real solution is to defer this one for a few months.
If I may, I was thinking more from the RFP process. So, in one of our other reports, you talked about combining 4 sidewalk projects because there may be a potential for savings through the bidding process. And so, to me, I see some similarities between these two projects, and it's more combining them and then going out to tender and trying to realize some savings from being a bigger project. That was my point.
Well, Mr. Sinoskis? Through you, Mr. Chair, we haven't done the design work for the cold side yet, so that's where the gap is. So we need time to actually bring them together. And we did look at that as trying to defer this one for a few more months to try and make that synergy. But our belief is the benefit of proceeding with this one is some additional cost avoidance by moving forward now than waiting.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. Are there any further comments? If there's none, then I'll call a vote. All in favor of item 8? Opposed? Carries, Mr. Clerk. Move then to item 12, which was pulled by Councillor Kim. Councillor Kim?
Actually, I would like to withdraw my request, please.
Okay.
Still need a motion.
A motion?
We still need a motion.
Okay. So would you like to put it forward still? Move it as is. Seconded by Councillor Humphreys. Mr. Mayor, would you like something to say about that?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My first question to Mr. Downey is with respect to his magnanimous increase on the number.
Mr. Downey?
Through Mr. Chair, with regards to the increase, it actually stemmed from the request of council to look at this and figure out exactly what the cost of the work was. So staff were in detailed discussions with the president of the Aurora Community Ball Association to determine exactly what work needed to be done, how often that work needed to be done, the hours related to that work, and then placed a cost to that. We have identified the costs in the report in the financial implication section. So we have determined that the work that is being performed by the group is somewhere around 620 hours per year. We have put a price of $13.50 to it. However, if you use just minimum rate, which is $11, or minimum wage, which is $11.78, that's $7,303. But we're looking somewhere in the range of $7,000 or better worth of work provided by the Aurora Community Ball Association in bringing the diamond from the service level that the town provides to the service level that they have indicated. So that was in response to council's request that we look at the actual cost of work and then determine what level of payment or subsidy we should be providing.
Mr. Mayor?
Well, I thank Mr. Downey for the detailed explanation. I appreciate that. I can't support it. This is still, in my opinion, and with all due respect to Mr. Giroux, who is patiently sitting in the audience, and we appreciate you coming in again, sir, this is a level of service that council has not authorized. So this is increasing the service level that we haven't talked about. It's indirectly increasing a service level. So council has not agreed to do that. And I will remind council once again, in the budget meeting just a couple of weeks ago, council asked staff to cut our expenses by $300,000 and increase our revenues by $100,000. And this is doing the exact opposite. So I cannot support it for that reason alone.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have Councillor Thompson next.
Thank you. Through Mr. Downey. Mr. Downey, the way the recommendation reads, you're asking for council to improve and enhance the service level, as said in the report, but you're also asking that we enter into a facility maintenance agreement between the town and Aurora King Baseball Association. Is that fairly unique for the town to enter into a facility maintenance agreement with another sporting organization for us?
Mr. Downey?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it's unique in that it's a partnership, in that we provide some level of service and they provide some level of service. We have existing agreements with the Aurora Soccer Club that they do all the maintenance on that particular facility, and there's no work being performed by the town. We have a similar agreement with the Theatre Aurora, for instance, where they take over the ongoing operations of the building, and the town is simply providing them that opportunity. This is unique in that we are, we had a previous agreement with the Aurora Lawn Bowling Club, I apologize, where the Lawn Bowling Club was providing services to the maintenance of the Lawn Bowling Club, and we were also providing some maintenance. The Lawn Bowling Club then got to a point where they could no longer do it, and our new agreement with the Lawn Bowling Club indicates that we take over all maintenance with regards to it. So this is unique now in that we will continue to carry on maintenance responsibilities on this diamond. We'll continue to pick up the litter and cut the grass and do all of those things. This is primarily focused on the infield, and so the Minor Ball Association has come in and said, we'd like to take care of that. From a procedural perspective, I think it's important that council provides clear direction in support of a service level. So that's why the requirements within Schedule A are identified, and we're asking for council approval. So there's no question about what council's expectations are with regards to the service level. Because whether it's Aurora King Minor Ball or anybody else, we want to make sure that those service levels are being maintained. Because if they're not, then we need to address that issue by either reducing those service levels or providing additional sources in order to maintain those service levels. So that's the purpose of the first part of making sure that we clearly understand what the service level is. The second part then is, how do we get that work done? And the indication from council in our discussion was we wanted Aurora King Minor Ball to do that, and so we placed the last two recommendations before council so that we could then move forward with not only executing an agreement with Aurora King Minor Ball, but of course then putting a budget line to that so that we could pay them.
Does that help, Mr. Thompson? Thank you, Mr. Downey. As a follow-up, certainly going back to the previous discussion we had about increasing the service level and the desire to see Stuart Barnett as a bit of a premier field for baseball. But as I read through the report, there's certainly still some information that really isn't known, or because it is a unique situation, or entering into something that is relatively new, especially if you look at how will it impact other community organizations or others that may come to before council. Is it possible to look at the agreement from a pilot perspective, whereby we would just do it as a pilot project and you would report back at the end of the year so that we can then better determine, I guess, the impact, any other additional effect, cause and effect as a result of it, and then determine if that's the best way forward? Mr. Downey?
Through you, Mr. Chair, without getting into the debate, I would support something along those lines. I think that's an excellent way of approaching this. Being this a unique situation, that might be the most appropriate way to go.
I think it certainly is my preference. I'll wait to hear some other comments around the table, but I think that because of the unique nature of it, because there are some concerns with regards to it that I've heard previously and around the table, that maybe this is a good opportunity for us to do it as a pilot program, and then learn from it in terms of giving some ownership to the facilities or to the fields, to the groups that use it, but at the same time, looking at it from a town perspective and managing that risk. I know that, we always, when we talk about service levels, be it for sidewalk clearing or for sports fields, it kind of always relates back to a little bit of risk, and I know that's a concern for some around the table. And so I think I'm still in favor of moving forward with it, but I'd like to do it as a pilot project and then ask Mr. Downey to report back at the end of the baseball season or at the end of the year so that we can truly assess the impact of it and make a determination about going forward. Just for clarification, were you asking for amendment or just making a comment?
I will make that amendment. It's not later, but I'd like to hear comments around the table and whether other people see there's merit in that idea.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Thompson. I have Councillor Humphreys next, Councillor Peary, Councillor Abel, and Councillor Kim. Councillor Humphreys?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I support this recommendation, and I support the 1 year, if that's where we're going to go. My question is, although it's providing the enhanced service level impact, I don't see any savings from the town perspective. So although it looks like we're doing, for me, what is it that we're saving? There's got to be maintenance hours that we're saving, and I don't see any of them here in this report. They were the last report. there were several hours that were savings. I mean, we're not going to be doing any of the infield work, so it's not just all for the ball team. They're going to pick up this work, and we're going to look like it's, at the end of the day, it's a wash for everyone. But I'd like to understand, there has to be some hours, and I saw at the last report that we were saving some time. So I don't want this to look like we're doing a special agreement for the ball team, because they're the ones who are going to do all the work to make a different level of service. We're not. So if the ball team wants to do it, then we're giving them an opportunity to showcase a ball diamond that's going to be exquisite for us. We can showcase it, maybe even more tournaments held here because of it, and we look good because at the end of the day, who's going to know it's the ball team doing it, not the town, but we'll make that clear to other teams or groups that may be interested in doing the same type of thing. So for me, it's not just a win-lose, it's a win and a kind of a win, not a complete lose on our side. So I'd like to understand, in here there's nowhere that says we're having any cost benefit, and I'm sure these hours in the infield are all coming off our hours, which we can redeploy these people in other areas of our parks that need work. Now, not to this extent, because we absolutely didn't do all this great work, but we did hours, and I saw them on the last report. So for me, I don't see this, through Mr. Chair, as Mayor Dahl said, you don't support this because it's demonstrating a different level of service, but it's not the town that's doing it, it's the group and committee, and we get a benefit because we're relieving our staff in doing this work. That's how I see it.
Thank you, Councillor Humphries. I have Councillor Peary next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Mr. Downey, I don't have my report from last week. I ended up cleaning out my system. How much did we increase over last week's request? Was it 7,000 as well? Did we go up?
Mr. Downey?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the previous report, the proposal that Aurora King Manoball wanted was to waive the fee, and in return, they would provide a certain level of maintenance. So we had approximated that cost at $6,000. The actual current fees in 2014, I believe, was $6,318. So with the discussion that we had with regards to this report a couple of weeks ago, we went back and wanted to clearly identify exactly the work that was going to be performed. And when we did that, and we put hours to it, we wanted to come back to council and say, we are looking at more than likely around $7,000 worth of permitting. We believe that based on the permitting that we are now seeing for the 2015 season, we're going to be a little closer to that $7,000 mark than the $6,300 mark.
Councillor Peary?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For me, we're talking about $7,000 in the scheme of things, and we are, in my opinion, focusing on a facility and providing a better level of service than other municipalities do around us to really put emphasis on this facility. And when we talk about having a year of sport and building our sports tourism, what will make people want to come here are having facilities that do that extra little bit. And in my view, this is doing that extra little bit at a very nominal cost. And so it's something that I support. Mr. Mayor had stated that, we haven't, as of yet, discussed the service levels and increasing the service levels, so we can't, look at the increasing the budget. I see this as a great opportunity to discuss those service levels now, and it's a service level increase that I very much am in favor of because it helps differentiate us from other municipalities around us, and it's providing that extra little bit for people who use these when they're looking to host a tournament in a certain location. Based on prior experience, they might say, you know what, those Aurora guys, they did a good job of making sure our pitchers had a nice, safe mound to pitch on. It makes sense to me. So for this cost, I am very much in favor of moving forward on this.
Thank you, Councillor Piri. I have Councillor Abel and Councillor Kim. Councillor Abel?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good points by councillors to showcase our facility. But I heard Councillor Humphreys address it and Councillor Perry ask it. How many hours of staff time are being saved from this? I understand what the Ball Association is putting in, but through you, Mr. Chair, how much staff time is now being saved on this?
Mr. Downey, could you comment on that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we have not identified the number of hours, I believe, in a previous report. So I haven't got an exact number of hours. I apologize for the amount of time that we're placing on this diamond with regards to the infield. So if council would like, I can certainly ask our manager of parks to provide that information, give me the number of hours that we would not be putting into this particular diamond and be reallocating elsewhere within the municipality. I'd be happy to do that, but I haven't got that number before me.
Okay.
Councillor Abel?
Thank you, and I could list a few analogies of why I think it's a good idea. I mean, we've got the facility, we might as well make it look its best, and if we're entertaining out-of-towners and even our own residents, it is, in my mind, a good partnership. And that's what we talk about a lot, is building partnerships and with organizations. We don't want to encourage that this is a way to offset fees, but in this certain instance, our premier field, Stuart Burnett, which is to a different standard than our other parks, our ball diamonds, they're favorable to the ones in Lampert and in the Arboretum down there. Those are nice ball diamonds too. But I think of other ones where I played ball with my kids and school grounds. Those are just, they're just fields. They're not really a good ball diamond with an infield, etc. So I am in support, but I would like to know, Mr. Downey, what sort of numbers we're saving. It might be half of what the ball diamond's putting in there, but I certainly appreciate the enhancement that they're providing.
Thank you, Councillor Abel. I have Councillor Kim next. Councillor?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was going to withdraw this because I thought we exhausted it last time, but I might as well give my comment now. On page 89, Mr. Downey stated that should the town provide the enhanced service levels, it would cost roughly $8,370, and our fees are estimated at $7,000, and that we would need a dedicated staff contingent to be devoted to this facility during the playing season. Are we undercutting ourselves then by charging so little? Because it seems like how do we go from $7,000 to just an extra $1,370, and you need a dedicated staff as opposed to a status quo group of staff from previous years.
Mr. Downey?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'm not asking for any additional staff. We put this in for an operational perspective. Whenever we have a contractor, we have full-time staff inspecting that contractor's work. So we would treat Aurora King Minor Ball like we would treat any other contractor, and so that now we would have to have an ongoing inspection of these facilities to ensure that our contractor was performing these services to the service level indicated and approved by council. So we would then be ensuring that this was part of our ongoing full-time dedicated staff inspection cycle, and that's the reason we put that in the report. So there's no additional cost. It's simply we want council to be aware that we are going to be watching Aurora King Minor Ball to make sure that they do the work they say they're going to do.
Councillor King?
Yes, I support the organization. I know my son played last year, and he had a great time, and the people are marvelous, but given the heated budget debate that we had a few weeks ago, if I voted for this, then I'm not sure how I could be principled in terms of the other discussions that we're going to have. So for that reason, I'd share the mayor's view in that I can't support this. But I think I would introduce this for next year, though.
Thank you, Councillor Kim. I have Councillor Thompson and Mayor Daw speaking for a second time. Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through to Mr. Downey. Mr. Downey, that facility maintenance agreement, would it just normally be a one-year agreement that you would renew year after year, or would you have to come before council each year? I just want to get a clarification the way it reads in the report.
Mr. Downey or Mr. Elliott?
Through Mr. Chair, my expectations, we would enter into an agreement, and it would be an ongoing agreement as long as the money was being provided within our budget. We would then continue with the terms and conditions of that agreement. We wouldn't be coming back to council each year to have that agreement re-signed. Thank you, and that's my interpretation. So I would like to put forward an amendment at this time that the Aurora King Baseball Association provision of maintenance services at Stuart Burnett Park Baseball Diamond be identified as a one-year pilot project, and that staff report back on the program after the conclusion of the baseball season.
Do you have that, Mr. Clerk?
I have it written down. I can pass it along. I can say it again.
Do we have a seconder for that? Councillor Maracas? To the amendment?
I mentioned it earlier. I think that there's a fairly unique piece here. In addition to, within the report, there are some comments about staff are not fully able to identify certain costs and impact, and so I think that as we stated earlier about being a showcase, that it is a good pilot project, but I think more information is needed at the conclusion to determine whether it's in the best interest of the town to keep moving forward. So on a one-year basis, I'm fine with supporting it all.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. Now, Mayor Daw, I had you next to speak for the main motion. Would you like to speak next for the amendment?
No, I'll wait till it's...
Wait till then? And Councillor Maracas, I had you. Would you like to wait as well? Is there anyone who would like to speak to the amendment? Oh, okay. Councillor Maracas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm in favor of this amendment. I think it's a great idea that we do it as a pilot project for 1 year and see what the outcome is at the end of the year. So I think that's great. And thanks to Councillor Thompson for making that amendment. Just wanted to say I think this is just a pretty simple, clear-cut thing. Someone's going to be doing a job. We're going to be paying them for it. And they're going to be providing a service level that's above and beyond what we do, and I think it's great. And it's the year of sport, as we mentioned, and also I think we are developing a sport plan, and I think this is probably something that would probably come up during the going through that sport plan and investigating what we would be looking to do. So I think that this would eventually be something that we would look to do. And so like I said, I just think it's something that someone's offering a service, they're going to be doing some work for us, and we're going to be compensating them for that. And as far as budget items, I think there's many ways when it comes to the budget that we can reduce it that wouldn't affect service levels, and I don't think $7,000 is going to really hurt us when we come to that budget talk. So, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I have Councillor Peary.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm in favor of the amendment. I think it makes sense. My only request, though, I heard Councillor Thompson talking about what happens if other organizations come before us and request similar treatment. It might make sense to do a 2-year pilot so that if there are other organizations who do come forward, we could sort of encapsulate everything over that 2-year period. Otherwise, we're only going to be reporting back, after 6 months, because that's when the season will be done. So I'd much rather see a 2-year, but I'm very much in favor of this now.
Thank you, Councillor Peary. Are there any other comments on the amendment? Then I will call Councillor Thompson.
I'll just respond to Councillor Perry's. I think for now, I'd like to keep it as just an initial pilot, but, depending on the report that comes back, or even if it's just a brief update after the end, I mean, I'm fine with extending it, but I think that I'd just like to do it in stages and see what the initial input from staff is.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. I'll call Councillor Perry.
Just like I said, I'm very much in favor of proceeding, so I'm fine with that.
Wonderful, then I'll call a vote to the amendment. All in favor? Opposed? That carries, Mr. Clerk. Back to the main motion as amended. I had Mayor Daw to speak next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just want to be perfectly clear. I don't have an issue with the ball club wanting to improve their operating field. More power to them. My issue is how we are going about increasing a service level the council hasn't directed. We haven't asked staff to look into. So it's not a case of the $7,000. I think the last time this came up, we spent an hour and 10 minutes talking about it as opposed to 7 minutes on a $10 million fire budget. So it's not the money. It's my opinion, it's how we're going about discussing the issue. We have, I agree that we can use this as a driver to bring business to town, baseball business and that kind of stuff, but we haven't done any of that work. So I think it can happen, but there's nothing here that we can actually base that opinion on. So I have no problem doing that. I have no problem saying we could do this and this makes sense. But I just think that we are proceeding in a manner that is, in my opinion, is inappropriate, so that's why I can't support it.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have Councillor Gardner.
Thank you. I also want to say that I think Mr. Giroux has added something to Aurora that was almost unimaginable when it was first discussed in this chamber many years ago. But I agree with the mayor and with Councillor Kim. This does involve a service level that council has not improved. We are so concerned about the tax increase to our residents that we have a motion on the floor, an approved motion, where we have to cut $300,000 and increase revenue by $100,000. And it isn't the $6,000 or the $7,000. It's the principle. It's what I believe we have to stand for as a council. And we've exhibited our concern only a few weeks ago. This agreement is not going to save us money. It may save staff time, but it won't save staff money. It will be setting a precedent for other sports groups who want to increase their level of service. I just think it's wrong, and I can't vote for it.
Thank you, Councillor Gardner. I have Councillor Peary to speak next. Councillor Peary.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be brief. To anybody saying that we aren't talking about improving the service level and upping the service level, I'd just like to point out that recommendation number 2, the second paragraph says that we will be enhancing our service levels, and if you have a problem with enhancing our service levels, take a look at Schedule A, and if there's an issue you have with that, maybe we should be discussing that. But it's fully in front of us at this point in time to increase our service levels, and we're having that discussion. I'm open to having that discussion, and if you don't want to have that discussion, that's fine, but don't say that we aren't able to have that discussion. So it's here in front of us, and if anybody has any concerns about those service levels, we're enumerating how we're going to change our service levels, so I can see the benefit in this. It's in front of us. It's in black and white. So I'm not sure how we can say that we haven't set out to change our service levels. Staff is showing us how the service levels will be changed if we let staff change them.
Thank you, Councillor Peary. Are there any more comments on the item as amended? We have Councillor Thompson and Councillor Gardner, I suppose, for a second time on the amended. Or is it?
So we're on our, Councillor Thompson speaking for a third time on the main motion. Councillor Gardner would be a second.
It would be second time by Councillor Gardner, correct?
Yes.
Councillor Gardner?
Thank you, and I would love to approve this. I think what's going on with baseball and this diamond in particular is, it's really wonderful. But we have sat at this table and we have all heard from our residents how unhappy they were when we cut our service level to the snow this winter. And I don't know how I, for one, cannot sit here and talk about a service level and whatever way you want to phrase it, but allowing an increase in service level and still maintaining a decreased service level for our residents for our snow removal. Again, I think it's wrong.
Thank you, Councillor Gardner. I believe there are no further comments to this, so I will call a vote on the item as amended. All those in favor? And opposed? That carries. Okay, we'll move to item 14, and this item was pulled also by Councillor Kim.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Page 101, we need to put that on. Oh, sorry, I'd like to put this item on the floor, please.
Seconded by Councillor Perry. Councillor Kim?
Yes, on page 101, in the Environmental Advisory Committee meeting minutes, it states that the committee inquired about the status of the Stronach Echo Park, and its staff indicated the timelines are unknown. Is there any way, I know I've heard in the last couple of years many rumors of what that land could be, whether it be an echo park or a dozen soccer pitches, and also I think on either side of Mavanac, north of Wellington, there's two lots there that Magna or Mr. Stronach owns as well. Is there any way that we could corner Mr. Stronach or some representative of Magna and just have a final discussion or something to kind of confirm what those lands could be or will be?
I'm not sure I'm going
to Mr. CAO or Mr. Downey?
Mr. Mayor has the most recent information.
Okay, as I said, I don't think I'd corner Mr. Stronach, but Mr. Mayor, would you like to comment on that question?
First of all, I do believe Mr. Stronach is not cornerable in his comment. I will commit to follow up. The person who would follow up with is on vacation. I did ask him probably a month ago as to what was going on, and he was having some difficulties getting in touch with Mr. Stronach, but I will follow up with the gentleman when he gets back from vacation and let council know.
Councillor Kim, is that it? Are there any more comments? Councillor Gardner?
Thank you. I noticed on page 100 there's an informational item on our CEAP, which is our Corporate Environmental Action Plan. This is maybe 5 years old now. I don't believe that any progress reports have actually come to council. I know they've come to the Environmental Advisory Committee, but I would like to request that council has an update on how we're doing with our Corporate Environmental Action Plan.
As a staff, I think it's more of a comment.
Well, they're reporting through the committee.
My preference would be if it would be a motion under new business.
Okay, I'm getting word from the CEO that if you'd like that to come forward, that it'd be a motion under a new business. Is that okay, Councillor Gardner?
It really isn't, because it says in the action plan that there's going to be a yearly update, and I don't understand why I would have to do a notice of motion in order to have a yearly update.
No, it's a notice of motion, just a motion in new business this evening.
Just make a motion in new business?
Yeah.
Fine.
Would you like to comment?
I'm sorry, not to be difficult, but it's outside of our normal practice. We would normally report to EAC, so my preference would be, well, that's what our history has been, so my preference would be for us to get a motion from council through new business.
Thank you, Mr. CAO. Are there any further comments to this item? Then I'll call a vote. All in favor? And opposed? That carries, Mr. Clerk. So we'll move on to new business, and I'll start with Councillor Peary, if you'd like to begin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I received a complaint that individuals who are collecting our garbage, we do a good job of dividing it into 3 separate receptacles. And I received a complaint that all 3 receptacles were getting put into the same bag here at Town Hall. Is there any way that we could make sure that everybody working in Town Hall know the procedures on how to handle recyclables, garbage, and compostables? Just a refresher on that, because it seems absurd that we would divide them out and then have everything go into the same bag. So through you, Mr. CAO, Mr. Simonauskas, I'm sure we can just have that discussion.
Mr. Mayor, would you like to comment? Just a clarification through you to Councillor Perry. This is here in Town Hall.
That was a complaint I'd received, yes.
Okay, thank you. At Town Hall.
At Town Hall, that's correct.
You look into it? Okay. Anything else, Councillor Perry? Councillor Kim?
I don't have any new business, but can I comment on what Mr. Peary...
It's not typical. We've done under new business.
I usually take the advice of the clerk on these things. Councillor Kim, nothing for you? Mr. Mayor?
Thank you. Through you to Mr. Simonauskas, please. There's been some discussion lately. You and I had a discussion, and there was an email I saw from Councillor Kim today with respect to, specifically this came up at the Highland Gate public information meeting that was hosted last week by the potential developer, with respect to water bans and water restrictions. And if you could put, through you, Mr. Clerk, if Mr. Simonauskas could perhaps put together just a quick memo as to the differences, what the reality of the situation is, and if you could also include perhaps, and this will come out as we go through the whole process, but I think it might be beneficial for council to know that now, because there was lots of information being thrown around last week, not all of which was correct. So also if you could address sewage allocation, potential for sewage allocation, that is, water bans, water restrictions. I think that would help council.
Did you get all that, Mr. Simonauskas? Wonderful. Councillor Humphreys?
Okay, through you, Mr. Chair, just a comment. The council calendar, if at all possible, if all meetings could be included on the calendar, and that meetings should not overlap. I know this was one unfortunately was rescheduled and for whatever reason, but we all have to be able to attend all meetings, and I know it's not easy and it's tricky, but if I could ask that happens, that's possible. I know we talked about with the clerk a little bit, but I understand the Cultural Center wasn't part of this, but it's important that I think they're all here, they're all public meetings, and each councillor should be able to attend. That's, I hope I get that. So I'd like to have all meetings included on the calendar.
Can I comment, please?
Mr. Clerk?
Thank you. Through Mr. Chair, certainly with any of the towns, boards, committees, statutory boards, even our external statutory boards such as the library board, so any committee which the town has a level of control over, those would be properly included on the council calendar. Unfortunately, my department and the town has no control over sort of the external groups, which while we recognize that members of council are involved in, we have no control over those, so it would be very difficult to maintain an accurate calendar associated with those because we're relying on those groups to tell us, and their meeting schedules. It would be very difficult to align our meeting schedule with external groups' meeting schedules when we already have an exceedingly busy calendar just with our internal stuff. So I'm just a little concerned about if we start including every external group, we might have a very unmanageable calendar or schedule.
Councillor, please.
You just, well then, council members were assigned to the Cultural Center Board. So I was going to miss a planning meeting, and I don't think that's good. So I'm being put in a very, not a good situation, and I think that's external, but I think that's one of those where we were actually appointed. And I know that the calendar was submitted to our secretary, so I don't know if it could, and if it's a conflict, then a decision will have to be made where perhaps my peer and I have to decide who gets to go. But I do think it's one of those I'd like us just to, unless I'm breaking the rules.
Perhaps we could work on reconciling the two?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Humphreys. Councillor Abel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was brought to my attention that there are a lot of potholes on Henderson Avenue, especially at the eastern area. I travel, like many of us do, the route, and they're not huge, but I was wondering if, through you, Mr. Chair, is there a schedule or a way of notifying or patching and et cetera? It's a well-traveled road. The resident that contacted me, and I talked to another one, there's a lot of heavy trucks that use that, so they thought rather than that heavy, making a compounding situation, if it's brought to your attention, perhaps a crew could get out there and do it, or how does one go about it? Through you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Simonauskas, would you like to comment?
So if you're Mr. Mayor, I'll definitely inform staff of that, and if any councillors do come across any concerns or requests from citizens, please forward them to me for some action.
Councillor?
That's good. That's all I wanted to ask.
Mr. Simonauskas, you gave me a promotion. Mr. Mayor. Anyways, that's another Jeff. Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a reminder that this Sunday is the Run for South Lake, so if you're not participating, then I encourage you to sponsor somebody who is, or just come out and cheer everybody on. It'll be a great Sunday morning event. And my second point really is, Mayor Don mentioned earlier about the Highland Gate open meeting. I'm hoping that, I know we have some information posted on our website, so perhaps through you to Mr. Ramuno. Mr. Ramuno, is it possible to add on to the information that's already on the website with regards to the Highland Gate closure and the development, to really just sort of outline the public planning process to draw more attention to it? Having attended that open meeting, there seemed to be some confusion around the process or the next steps. I know that it was addressed a little bit by members of council and the mayor who were there, but I think that it's important really to be able to clearly identify for those residents that live around there what the public process is for this development application, and or even maybe sending a letter to everybody now and saying that, it hasn't come, but here's the whole process, and explaining to them, because there just seems to be a lot of residents who are unclear what the next steps are, how they're going to have a say, and I think we should be proactive in how we're going to communicate with them. So be it through, sending them a registered letter or putting it on the website, or both, I think that, it's incumbent upon us to really clearly articulate the next steps in the process.
Mr. Urbana?
Sorry, through you, Mr. Chair. That won't be a problem. We have our public planning process procedures in place, and I can have something put on the website over the next couple of days. And I will be doing a report to the May GC cycle to council, just indicating a scheduling for the public planning meeting in June for that application.
Thank you, and I appreciate that, because I just think it's very important to reinforce that no decisions have been made, right? And it needs to be clearly articulated that, nothing has come before council. Council has not made any discussions or decisions upon this item, and so everybody will have another opportunity through the public planning process to raise any concerns that they may have.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. Councillor Gardner.
Thank you. I'd like to thank Mr. Simonauskas and Mr. Galen. I've been using the track at the complex, and the temperature is really, really good. So I don't know what you did, just did it right. And with respect to the motion about the Corporate Environmental Action Plan, I would like to make a motion that it comes a report comes forward to council. I was involved in that action plan, and it does say that an annual report will be presented. It doesn't say to who, so somehow it got to be the Environmental Advisory Committee, but I know that the public is very interested in environmental initiatives, so I'd like it to come to council. Thank you.
Is there a seconder for that? Councilor Maracas? Are there any comments on this, or should we just move straight to a vote? All in favor of the motion? Opposed? That carries, Mr. Clerk. Thank you, Councilor Gardner. And Councilor Maracas?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had a few comments that I received about the agenda for tonight's meeting, that it wasn't available on the website, and I was just wondering if something happened there. It wasn't available over the weekend, and I know normally we're supposed to have it up by Friday night, so the public planning one was available, but I got a lot of comments received, and I even checked it out myself, and it was not available over the weekend, so I was just wondering if something happened there or not. I don't know who can answer that for me.
I'll go to the clerk. Mr. Clerk?
Thank you, through Mr. Chair. I was not aware of that. In fact, I had a discussion with my team on Monday and said that everything had been posted on Friday as normal, so I will certainly look into that to see if there was perhaps some technological issue on the back end that my staff had not been aware of, or there was something in the process and the turnover, but I'll have a look into it. And I can tell you that clerk's department staff do stay late if necessary on Friday to get that posted.
No, thank you, and I do realize that, and that's why it just kind of came to a shock, because like I said, the public planning one was up and everything, so I thought maybe there was a glitch in the system, so I just got to make that aware. So, thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Maracas. And the only thing I would say today, and I won't spend too much time on it, is the 89th birthday of Her Majesty Elizabeth II, the Queen of Canada. And for all those assembled, I'd just like to make sure that we wish her a very happy birthday and best wishes for a good year. So that's all I have. And with that, we'll move to the closed session. We do have closed session items today, Mr. Clerk. So we will move into closed session for these two items, and then we can vote on adjournment afterwards.
Sure, just tell them that you want to do it by following adjournment.
Right, so we'll move into closed session following adjournment. So I need a mover, Council. Oh, would you like to comment or question?
I'd like to ask a question of Mr. Marr, our solicitor, with regards to item 2.
Do we need to put it on the floor first?
No, he's just asking.
Mr. Marr, would it be possible for us to report out with regards to item 2? I know there are a lot of residents who have an interest in that particular item.
Through Mr. Chair, it may be, but I think we should discuss in closed session what can be reported out, as some of the matters involved in there were part of confidential discussions.
So if that's the case, should we not wait until after to adjourn if there is some reporting out, or in terms of process, through you to Mr. Clerk?
Mr. Clerk, would you like to answer that?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, actually, not necessarily, because any general committee closed session recommendations would still have to be ratified next week at council before they become effective. So we would not be reporting out anything until council had confirmed the closed session recommendations of general committee anyways. No.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. So I will need a motion to move into closed session for two items after adjournment. Moved by Councilor Thompson, seconded by Councilor Maracas. All in favor? Opposed? That carries. And motion to adjourn. Moved by Mr. Mayor, seconded by Councilor Abel. All in favor? Opposed? That carries.